The rain hadn't stopped since dawn, a soft, steady drizzle whispering against the glass walls of the San Francisco Convention Center. Emily Carter sat alone in the corner cafe, hands wrapped around a paper cup that had already gone cold. Outside, people hurried by in polished shoes and pressed suits, chasing futures made of screens and algorithms. She, meanwhile, still believed in the rustle of paper, in stories you could hold, not swipe. Her editor said this conference might open doors. She didn't expect one of those doors would lead to him, Liam Prescott, the man who built an empire out of technology and a heart of ice. In less than 5 minutes, coffee would spill, tempers would rise, and her quiet world of ink and words would collide with his empire of code and profit. She didn't know yet that the man who silenced her with a single, impulsive kiss would later find himself haunted by it, by the fire he saw in her eyes. And neither of them knew that one reckless moment of anger would become the beginning of something neither logic nor pride could ever explain. Because sometimes, love doesn't start with a smile. It starts with a mistake and a silence only a kiss can fill. The hum of the conference filled the air, soft footsteps on polished marble, 1,000 conversations blending into one restless tide. Outside the glass walls, San Francisco shimmered in morning fog, the city still stretching awake. Inside, the future was being sold in bright lights and digital promises. Emily Carter stood in line at the cafe corner of the Grand Hall, clutching her notebook like it was an anchor. Her badge hung crookedly from her blazer. Emily Carter, senior editor, Bayline Publishing. She had promised herself she would stay quiet today. Just listen. Maybe learn something about this new world of tech education. But the truth was, she already felt out of place. Everywhere she looked, there were screens, hands scrolling, eyes glowing blue, not a single printed brochure in sight, only holograms and QR codes. She sighed softly, whispering to herself, "Guess I'm the last dinosaur in the room." The barista called her name, and Emily stepped forward. A large coffee, too hot, too full. She turned quickly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and crashed straight into someone. The cup tipped, a dark splash, a startled gasp, and then silence. The liquid spread across the man's crisp white shirt, blooming like ink on paper. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Emily stammered, fumbling for napkins. "I didn't see." The man looked down at himself, then at her. His jaw tightened. His voice came out low, controlled, but sharp enough to cut glass. Clearly, Emily froze. Up close, he was older than she expected, early 30s maybe, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of presence that made space wherever he stood. His eyes, gray and unreadable, met hers with a cool precision that felt like judgment. I can help clean that up," she began. "No need," he interrupted, brushing at his shirt with a tissue someone had handed him. "Just be more careful next time." Something about his tone, the way he said next time, like she was a child who'd spilled juice on the table, ignited something in her chest. "Excuse me," she said, straightening her back. "I said I was sorry." He finally looked at her properly then, and for the first time, something flickered behind those gray eyes, surprise, maybe even amusement. "You think that fixes it?" Emily's heart thudded. "No," she said softly, "but neither does arrogance." The air around them shifted, the murmur of the crowd dimming, like the world was holding its breath. He stared at her, clearly not used to being talked to that way. Then, a small curve appeared at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "Noted," he said simply, and walked away. Only after he disappeared into the crowd did Emily realize she was shaking. The coffee had soaked into her own sleeve, warm and sticky, but all she could feel was the heat in her cheeks. Who was that man? She didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 hours later, she found herself seated in the main hall of the conference, notebook balanced on her knees, pretending to take notes while her mind replayed the scene over and over. The moderator stepped up to the stage, Ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker, Mr. Liam Prescott, CEO of Prescott Innovations. Emily's stomach dropped. There he was, the same man in a fresh shirt, standing tall behind a glass podium, his voice filling the room with that same calm authority. Education, he began, must evolve with technology, paper, print, and outdated methods no longer serve a generation born with touchscreens in their hands. The future is digital, adaptive, efficient, borderless. Applause rippled through the crowd. Emily's pen stopped moving. She felt her pulse quicken, not because of him, but because of every word he was saying. Every sentence felt like a dismissal of everything she loved. She had grown up surrounded by books, the smell of them, the weight, the quiet promise that they carried something real. To her, stories weren't meant to be swiped away. They were meant to be felt. When the Q&A began, her hand rose before her brain could stop it. Yes, the lady in the third row, the moderator said. Emily stood, voice steady but trembling beneath the surface. Mr. Prescott, you said print no longer serves this generation. But what about emotion? Memory. The feel of a real page turning in your hand. A few heads turned, cameras shifted. Liam looked directly at her. Emotion, he repeated slowly. Doesn't come from paper, Miss Carter, she replied. Emily Carter. He nodded. Emotion comes from content, not the medium. If a story moves you, does it matter whether it's on paper or a screen? She held his gaze. Maybe not. But if everything becomes disposable, one swipe and it's gone, what happens to the things we were meant to keep? A murmur spread through the hall. Liam's jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked like he might answer her calmly then. Something in his eyes changed. He stepped away from the podium, closing the distance between them in slow, deliberate strides. When he stopped in front of her, the room went silent. And before she could even breathe, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't soft, it wasn't gentle, it was shock. A brief, charged silence pressed against her lips. The audience gasped. 100 flashes went off. Emily froze. The world tilted. When he finally pulled back, his voice was barely above a whisper. Consider that. My answer. The sound of her own heartbeat drowned everything else. She stood there, eyes wide, the taste of coffee and shock still on her lips. Then, without a word, she slapped him, the sharp crack echoing through the hall, and she walked out. Outside, the fog had thickened, wrapping the city in gray. Emily's hands trembled as she stood by the glass doors, the cool air hitting her face. She felt humiliated, furious, and yet, beneath it all, something deeper, something she couldn't name, was stirring, somewhere behind her, through the walls of glass and noise. Liam Prescott was still standing on that stage, his expression unreadable, his hand brushing lightly against his jaw where she'd struck him. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt unsettled. There was something about the fire in her eyes, that mix of defiance and hurt, that refused to leave his mind. And for the first time in a long while, Liam realized the last word didn't belong to him anymore. Not this time. Outside, Emily turned toward the street, the city lights blurring through the mist. She took a deep breath, clutching her notebook against her chest like a shield. Something had shifted in him, in her, in the quiet space where anger meets curiosity. She didn't know it yet, but that single, reckless moment inside the conference hall was only the beginning. The sound of heels on marble echoed down the long corridor as Emily pushed open the heavy glass doors leading back into the conference hall. Her pulse still hadn't slowed since the incident. His lips, the flash of cameras, the shock that burned into her skin. She had left without looking back, but her mind hadn't left him for a single heartbeat. Now, she stood again under the cold lights of the same hall, her chest tight, her throat dry. She told herself she had come back because of work, because Bayline Publishing needed a presence here. But deep down, she knew she came back because she refused to let that man, that arrogant CEO, have the last word. Inside, The air was electric. The afternoon discussion panel was about to begin. Rows of chairs stretched toward a wide stage framed by screens flashing the words, "The future of learning." The hum of conversation filled the room, excited, expectant, unaware of the quiet storm sitting in the third row. Emily smoothed the edge of her blazer, her hands trembling slightly. She had barely slept last night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that moment again, the crowd, the flash of his watch under the stage lights, his face so close she could feel his breath. Anger rose in her like heat. Then the voice came, calm, polished, familiar. "Ladies and gentlemen," the moderator said, "please welcome Mr. Liam Prescott." Applause thundered. Liam stepped onto the stage, every inch of him controlled and confident, as if nothing extraordinary had happened the day before. A dark suit, silver tie, no emotion on his face. When his gaze swept across the audience, it brushed over Emily for a fraction of a second, enough to make her heart stutter, enough for her to see it. Recognition, and something else. He began to speak. "The truth is simple," he said, voice deep, measured. "The world has changed. Knowledge is no longer printed, it's streamed, shared, updated every second. Paper belongs to the past." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Emily's stomach clenched. She felt the old ache return, the ache of watching something beautiful fade in the name of progress. "Books are slow," he continued. "They can't adapt. They don't connect. Students today live in a world of instant access. We must meet them there." She could hear pens scratching around her, people nodding. Her pulse grew louder than their applause. When the moderator opened the floor for questions, her hand went up before reason could stop it. "Mr. Prescott," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the trembling inside. Liam looked at her again. This time, his gaze lingered. "Yes," she stood. "You said books are slow, that they can't connect. But maybe connection isn't about speed. Maybe it's about depth." He tilted his head slightly, almost smiling. "And you are Emily Carter," she replied. "Bayline Publishing." "Ah." He remembered now. His eyes darkened just enough to betray it. She went on, her voice rising with quiet conviction. "You talk about data and access like they're the same as understanding. But I've seen children hold a real book and light up because it's theirs. Because it smells like paper and ink. Because someone once read it to them before bed. You can't code that feeling." The room went still. Even the clicking of keyboards stopped. Liam folded his hands. "Nostalgia is powerful, Miss Carter. But progress doesn't wait for sentiment." "Maybe not," she said softly. "But sentiment is what makes us human." He laughed under his breath, a small, disbelieving sound. "And emotion pays the bills." "Does it?" Her jaw tightened. "Sometimes the things that matter most don't have a price tag." He took a slow step toward the edge of the stage. "Idealism doesn't build the future, and cynicism doesn't make it worth living." She shot back. The audience shifted, sensing something raw unraveling between them. Cameras lifted. The air felt charged. He walked down from the stage, his eyes locked on her. "You really don't know when to stop, do you?" "Not when the truth's at stake," she whispered. For a heartbeat, everything went quiet, like the air itself held its breath. Then, in a movement so sudden it barely seemed real, Liam closed the distance between them. Emily felt the world tilt again, the scent of his cologne, the warmth of his breath, and before she could step back, his lips were on hers. A soft gasp broke through the crowd. The room erupted in murmurs and camera clicks, but all Emily could hear was the pounding of her own heart. It wasn't like the first time. This kiss wasn't angry, it was controlled, deliberate, almost gentle, but it was no less shocking. It silenced her. Yes, but it silenced him too. When he finally pulled away, his voice was low, almost hoarse. "Now," he said quietly, "will you let me finish?" Her palm stung before she even realized she'd struck him. The sound cracked through the silence. sharp and clear. "You don't get to decide when I speak," she said, her breath trembling. He didn't move, didn't speak. He only looked at her, his jaw tightening as if he were holding something back, anger, maybe shame, maybe something he didn't have a name for. She turned and walked out, her steps quick, uneven. Outside the hall, the air was colder. The sound of the city rushed back in cars, voices, a distant siren. Emily leaned against the glass wall, pressing a hand to her chest. She could still feel the ghost of his touch, and it made her sick with confusion. Inside, Liam stood alone on the stage, the crowd buzzing like static around him. He had no idea what he'd just done or why he'd done it. All he knew was that he couldn't stand the way she'd looked at him, like she saw right through the armor he'd spent years building. He took a slow breath, forced his expression back into calm, and continued his speech as if nothing had happened. But the words felt empty now, hollow in his throat. Down the hall, Emily kept walking until her heels ached. She didn't know if she was more angry or humiliated, or why a part of her, a quiet, traitorous part, kept replaying the look in his eyes just before he kissed her. It wasn't victory, it was something else, something that scared her more than anger ever could. She stopped by the tall window overlooking the bay. The water shimmered under the gray sky, endless, restless. For a moment, she wished she could throw her notebook into it and let everything sink: the anger, the confusion, the strange, unshakable pull she felt toward a man she swore she despised. But she couldn't. She straightened, drew in a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "This isn't over." Far below, the city lights flickered on, one by one, like quiet witnesses. And somewhere behind her, in a boardroom filled with applause and shallow praise, Liam Prescott touched the corner of his mouth, remembering the taste of coffee and defiance, and wondered, for the first time, if he'd just started a war he wasn't ready to win. The air in the hotel lobby still carried whispers from the conference, like smoke that refused to fade. Emily could feel eyes following her as she crossed the marble floor, her steps uneven, her breath shallow. Every conversation she passed seemed to hush for a heartbeat, then stir again, softer, like people afraid to speak too loud in front of the woman who'd been kissed on stage by Liam Prescott. Her hands trembled as she pressed the elevator button. Her reflection in the mirrored wall stared back, hair messy, lips still faintly flushed, eyes wide with disbelief. Shame rose hot and heavy in her chest. How could he do that? In front of everyone? And worse, how could her body freeze instead of pushing him away sooner? When the elevator doors slid shut, Emily leaned her forehead against the cool metal and exhaled. "Never again," she whispered. The words came out thin, but she needed to hear them aloud. By the time she reached her hotel room, her phone was already lighting up with messages, from colleagues, from friends, even from her editor. "Are you okay? Was that staged? Did he really?" She dropped the phone onto the bed and sank into the nearest chair. The room was quiet, too quiet, except for the faint hum of the city beyond the window. She could still hear the echo of the crowd's gasp, the quick beat of her own pulse when his face came close. It made her stomach twist, part anger, part something she refused to name. Emily poured herself a glass of water, her fingers unsteady. She wanted to cry, but tears felt useless, too small for the storm churning inside her. Instead, she picked up her notebook, the one with the soft leather cover she always carried, and wrote a single line: "Dignity doesn't come from silence." Then, she shut it hard. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Her face, his face, the kiss. Tech tycoon silences publishing editor with a kiss. Romance or power play, conference drama, goes viral. Emily stood in line at the cafe downstairs, every whisper behind her sounding like her name. She ordered her coffee quietly and kept her head down. But when she turned, she saw a camera pointed her way. A stranger lifted a phone, smiling nervously. "Miss, can I just—" "No," she said firmly, stepping aside. Her heart pounded as she walked out into the morning air. The fog had lifted, leaving the city too bright, too loud. She pulled her scarf higher around her neck, wishing she could disappear into the crowd. But she couldn't. She had work to do, and San Francisco was small enough that avoiding Liam Prescott entirely was impossible. That afternoon, she returned to the conference center for her panel discussion on the future of print. The irony wasn't lost on her. As she walked onto the stage, the audience buzzed louder than usual. She felt every stare, every camera. But when she started speaking, her voice came steady, even calm. Stories, she said, have always survived change, from scrolls to paper, from print to pixels. What matters isn't the format, it's the heartbeat inside. Applause rose, tentative at first, then stronger. For the first time since yesterday, Emily breathed fully. From the back of the room, a shadow moved. Liam Prescott had arrived. She saw him standing there, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. A muscle tightened in her jaw. When the panel ended, she gathered her notes quickly, hoping to slip away, but his voice stopped her. "Miss Carter." She froze. Slowly, she turned. Liam stood a few steps away, his suit impeccable, his tone measured. "We should talk." "There's nothing to talk about," she said sharply. His eyes met hers. "There is... about yesterday. You mean the part where you humiliated me in front of an entire hall, or the part where the internet decided to call me your next PR stunt?" He flinched barely, but enough for her to notice. "That wasn't my intention." "No," she asked, her voice trembling now. "Then what was it, Mr. Prescott? Some kind of dominance display. You couldn't handle being challenged by a woman on your stage, so you decided to shut her up." His jaw tightened. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it?" she demanded. He hesitated. For the first time, he looked unsure. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "I just reacted." "Reacted," she repeated, her laughter short and bitter. "You don't get to react like that and walk away clean." He said nothing. The silence between them stretched, thick as smoke. Then Emily shook her head, gathering her bag. "You may run an empire, Mr. Prescott, but you don't own my voice. Remember that." She turned and walked out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Liam watched her go, his expression unreadable. Around him, conversations resumed, but none of them reached him. He should have felt anger after all. She'd embarrassed him publicly, but instead, all he felt was the strange, hollow echo of her words. He replayed her face in his mind, the fire in her eyes, the tremor in her voice, the way she stood tall despite the weight of the room. He hadn't expected her to fight back like that. Most people didn't. Most people bowed under his authority, softened their tone, lowered their gaze, but not her. That night, in his suite overlooking the city, Liam poured himself a glass of whiskey and stood by the window. The skyline glittered below, cold and perfect, a mirror of his life structured, untouchable. Yet something about that moment on stage kept burning in him. He hadn't meant to kiss her. It had been impulse, frustration, maybe fascination. But when his lips met hers, something in him had cracked. For a second, he'd felt something real, something he hadn't felt in years. And that scared him. He took a slow sip. Watching the fog roll back in from the bay, somewhere in the distance, a ferry horn sounded. He closed his eyes, hearing again her voice in that steady, trembling way. "You don't own my voice." For the first time in a long while, Liam Prescott felt small. Emily, meanwhile, sat alone in her hotel room, knees drawn up to her chest. The city lights painted faint lines across the floor. Her phone buzzed again, another notification, another article, but she didn't look. She was tired of seeing her name beside his. She whispered to herself, "He'll forget about this tomorrow." Men like him always do. But even as she said it, some quiet corner of her heart doubted it. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft and steady, the kind that blurs city lights into watercolor. Somewhere across town, Liam lifted his gaze from the window and whispered her name once under his breath. testing how it felt in the quiet. Emily. And though neither of them knew it yet, that single word spoken into the night was the beginning of something that neither apology nor pride would be able to silence. The morning sunlight poured through the wide glass windows of Bayline Publishing, soft but merciless, laying bare every unfinished cup of coffee, every tired face, every dream hanging on a thread. Emily walked briskly through the hallway, clutching a stack of manuscripts against her chest. Her heels clicked softly against the tile floor, a sound that somehow steadied her after the stormy week she'd just survived. The headlines had finally faded, the whispers had quieted, but the memory of that moment on stage still clung to her like the faint smell of smoke after a fire. She'd promised herself she wouldn't think of Liam Prescott again. Not his name, not his voice, and certainly not his lips. Her plan lasted exactly 4 minutes. Emily, her editor, Karen, called from the glass office at the end of the corridor. "Do you have a minute?" Emily smiled faintly, pushing the door open. "Always." Karen gestured toward a folder on her desk. "You're going to love this or hate it." Depends how you look at it. That tone, half amusement, half warning, made Emily's stomach tighten. "What's going on?" Karen leaned back in her chair. "We've just signed a 6-month collaboration deal. A tech literacy initiative. Digital meets print, that sort of thing. The board wants you to co-lead the editorial side." Emily's brows lifted. "Okay. Who's leading from their side?" Karen hesitated. "Just a beat too long." Emily's heart sank. "Please don't say Prescott Innovations," Karen said quickly, as if ripping off a bandage. "The CEO himself will be personally overseeing it." The world tilted for a second. Emily blinked, trying to process the words. Prescott? Liam Prescott? Her stomach turned to ice. "You're kidding," she said. "I wish I were." Karen sighed. "They specifically requested you. Emily. Apparently, he said you're passionate." "Passionate," Emily repeated, incredulous. "He humiliated me in front of hundreds of people." Karen gave her a sympathetic look. "Maybe this is his way of making it right. And honestly, we can't turn this partnership down. It's the biggest project we've ever landed. Just try to keep it professional." Professional. The word felt almost cruel. Emily left the office with the folder in hand, her chest tightening. Her mind flashed back to that conference stage, the heat in his eyes, the way her body had betrayed her by freezing. She could still hear the echo of her own voice, shaking with anger. "You don't own my voice." And now, fate or maybe punishment was tying them together again. By the time she reached the conference room that afternoon, her pulse was hammering. The door was slightly ajar. Through the gap, she saw him, Liam Prescott, seated at the far end of the long oak table, sleeves rolled up, speaking to a group of executives like nothing in the world could shake him. He looked different in daylight, sharper somehow. The cold precision in his face softened by exhaustion, or maybe something else. She hesitated at the door. For a moment, she thought about turning around and pretending she'd gotten the room wrong, but before she could move, he looked up. Their eyes met. The air seemed to shift, just slightly. "Miss Carter," he said, standing as if nothing awkward had ever existed between them. "Glad you could join us." She stepped inside, her chin high, her voice steady. "Mr. Prescott." Every gaze in the room flickered between them, curious but cautious. Liam gestured toward an empty seat beside him. "Please." She sat, careful to leave a full chair's worth of space between them. The scent of his cologne cedar and something faintly smoky still managed to find her. The meeting began, all numbers and timelines, but Emily could barely focus. Every time he spoke, she felt the prickle of awareness at the back of her neck. His tone was polite, detached, but underneath it, she could sense the quiet strain of unspoken memory. When it was her turn to speak, she did so clearly, firmly. "Our readers trust us because we honor the authenticity of storytelling. If this project reduces books to just another line of code, it will fail." Liam glanced her way, his lips curving faintly. "And if we cling too tightly to nostalgia, We'll never evolve. The words hit a nerve. She looked straight at him. You think respecting the past is nostalgia? I think emotion clouds judgment, he replied calmly. The room went silent for a second too long. Karen cleared her throat softly. Perhaps we can find a balance between emotional value and digital innovation. The rest of the meeting moved forward, but Emily felt her pulse in every word. When it ended, people filed out slowly, murmuring about deadlines and deliverables. Emily stayed behind, gathering her notes. She could feel Liam's presence before he spoke. You're still angry, he said quietly. She didn't look up. Angry implies I care. You care, he said. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Her fingers tightened around the pen. I'm here because this project matters. Not because of you. He studied her, the corner of his mouth twitching. You're the only person who's ever talked to me that way. She finally looked up, meeting his gaze. Then maybe that's your problem. Something flickered across his face, something almost like amusement. But not quite. Maybe it's yours, he said softly, then turned and walked out. For a long moment, Emily just stood there, heart pounding. She hated that his calmness got under her skin. She hated that part of her wanted to understand him. That night, she stayed late at the office, typing up notes for the next meeting. The city outside was dark and glowing, the kind of night that hums with possibility and regret. At some point, she noticed a reflection in the glass wall, a tall figure walking toward her. Liam. He stopped just outside the door. You're still here. I could say the same about you, she replied without looking up. He leaned against the doorframe. You're hard to ignore. You know that. She exhaled sharply. Is that a compliment or a warning? Both. Silence stretched between them. Only the soft hum of the city filled the space. Finally, she said, if we're going to work together for 6 months, let's set one rule, which is no personal comments, no bringing up the past, strictly business. He nodded slowly, agreed, but when he turned to leave, he paused. His voice dropped, softer now. You should know something, though. She looked up. I don't regret it, he said. The kiss. Her breath caught. Before she could respond, he walked away, leaving her alone in the quiet office, surrounded by the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of words she didn't want to feel. Outside, the rain began again, soft, patient, as if the city itself was listening. Emily leaned back in her chair, staring out at the shimmering skyline. For the first time, she didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or run. But deep down, she knew one thing for certain. 6 months was a long time. Too long to stay angry. Too long to stay untouched. And somewhere inside her, a whisper she didn't want to hear began to stir one that sounded a lot like curiosity. The next few weeks turned the office into a quiet battlefield. The project had barely begun, but everyone already knew one thing whenever Emily Carter and Liam Prescott were in the same room. No one else dared to breathe too loudly. The conference room became their arena. Ideas flew like sparks, and tension hung thick in the air, half thrilling, half dangerous. Emily stood at the front of the room, her sleeves rolled up, a marker in hand. Sketches of book covers and content outlines spread across the board. We're not just selling files, she said, her voice calm but firm. We're creating an experience, one that connects readers to something real. Across the table, Liam leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. Experiences don't keep the lights on. Miss Carter, profit does. She turned to him, a small, defiant smile tugging at her lips. Maybe the problem is that you think they're separate things. A few people exchanged nervous glances. The head of marketing pretended to cough just to break the silence. But Liam didn't flinch. He rose from his chair and walked to the board, close enough that she could feel the faint warmth of him beside her. Explain, he said simply. Emily's heart kicked, but she didn't step back. People don't fall in love with products, Mr. Prescott. They fall in love with meaning. You sell speed and convenience. I sell emotion. If we combine them, if we remember that a book isn't just content, it's comfort people will pay not because they have to, but because they want to. He studied her for a long moment, the corner of his mouth twitching. You really believe that sentiment sells? I believe people still need something that feels human, she replied. Liam looked at the sketches again. Quiet for longer than usual. Finally, he said, "All right, let's test it." The words caught her off guard. "You mean, you agree? Don't push your luck," he murmured, the faintest trace of humor in his tone. Someone in the back of the room stifled a laugh. The tension eased just slightly, but only for a moment. As the meeting continued, they went back and forth. Every decision, every phrase, every comma became a negotiation. When Liam spoke, his sentences were precise, strategic, built for efficiency. When Emily countered, her words carried color, rhythm, and warmth. They were complete opposites. Yet, somehow, the arguments never felt empty. Beneath the friction was something alive, something that made everyone else in the room feel like they were watching a dance neither of them realized they were performing. By the third meeting, the rest of the team had learned to simply take notes and stay out of the line of fire. One afternoon, during a particularly long brainstorming session, Emily caught Liam watching her while she explained a concept about reader engagement. His gaze wasn't condescending or impatient. It was curious, almost gentle. It unnerved her more than the arguments ever did. When their eyes met, he looked away first, but his jaw clenched, like he'd been caught thinking something he shouldn't. The clock ticked past 7 before the meeting finally ended. The last of the team filed out, leaving only the two of them in the soft glow of the empty office. Papers scattered across the table, 2 cups of cold coffee sitting untouched. Emily rubbed her temples. You really can't go 5 minutes without turning everything into a power struggle, can you? He looked up from his laptop, smirking. You say that like you don't enjoy it. Her lips parted, then closed again. Enjoy. You're insufferable. You're stubborn. And you're impossible. He leaned back in his chair, and yet, somehow, we get results. She couldn't argue with that. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, comfortable in a strange way. The hum of the city outside filtered through the windows, blending with the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Liam broke the quiet first. You know, he said, his tone softer now, you're the first person who's ever made me question my methods? Emily blinked, surprised. Is that supposed to be a compliment? He shrugged. Take it however you want. She tilted her head, studying him. You're not as cold as you pretend to be. He met her gaze. Don't be so sure. Something unspoken flickered in the air, too fragile to name, too dangerous to linger on. Emily looked away first, pretending to gather her notes. Anyway, she said, her voice quieter now, this project isn't about you or me. It's about making something that matters. Agreed, he said after a pause. But maybe we're both figuring out what that actually means. She looked up again, and for just a heartbeat, the distance between them felt thinner than before. The next day, their debates resumed fiercer than ever. In one meeting, she argued that handwritten author notes should be part of the digital editions. He said it was inefficient. She said it was personal. He said personal didn't scale. She smiled and replied, maybe not everything should. Around them, their coworkers pretended to take notes, secretly watching every exchange like it was a show they couldn't stop following. The tension, the wit, the unspoken attraction, it all hung in the air like static before lightning. At one point, when Emily reached for the same file he was holding, their fingers brushed a small, accidental touch that neither of them acknowledged, but both felt. The brief contact lingered like a secret. That night, long after everyone had gone home, Liam sat alone in his office. He opened the latest draft Emily had sent and read it slowly, word by word. The way she wrote about stories about how they stitched humanity together, it did something to him. It made him remember why he'd once loved reading before numbers took over his life. He closed his laptop, staring at the skyline outside. The city lights blinked like restless thoughts. He didn't understand her, not fully, but he couldn't stop thinking about her either. Meanwhile, in her apartment across town, Emily sat on the couch with a mug of tea, staring at the same kind of light through a different window. She should have been angry he was arrogant, condescending, and infuriating, and yet every argument with him left her strangely alive. She whispered into the quiet, almost to herself, "You're not supposed to be interesting." The words hung there, unanswered, fading into the hum of the night. And somewhere between competition and curiosity, between defiance and attraction, the line between enemy and something else began to blur quietly, dangerously, beautifully. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing against the city windows like a sigh, as if even the night itself knew that neither of them had any idea what was coming next. The office after dark had its own kind of silence, not empty, but alive, humming with the low thrum of city lights and the faint buzz of old fluorescent bulbs. The glass walls reflected a world half-asleep towers glittering like constellations, the streets far below bathed in amber glow. It was the hour when most people had gone home, but Emily was still there, hunched over her laptop, surrounded by stacks of notes and open books. The quiet made her thoughts louder. Every key she pressed seemed to echo across the empty floor. She told herself she stayed late for work, that the deadlines were too close, the drafts too messy. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just that. There was something about the stillness about knowing he was still somewhere in this building that kept her there. The elevator chimed softly behind her. She didn't look up, but her pulse jumped anyway. His footsteps were slow, even, confident. She could tell it was him before he said a word. Still here? She didn't need to turn around. Apparently, so are you. He walked closer, the smell of coffee and faint cologne tracing the air between them. "I was reviewing projections for the next quarter," he said, setting a folder down beside her desk. "Didn't expect to find you still at it." Emily leaned back, folding her arms. "Deadlines don't respect sleep schedules." He smiled slightly. "Neither do stubborn editors." She looked up, about to respond, but his eyes caught hers steady, unreadable, with just enough warmth to unsettle her, the kind of look that made her forget the words on her tongue. He moved around to the other side of the table, rolling his sleeves up. "Show me what you're working on." She hesitated. "You'll just tell me it's inefficient." "Probably," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "But show me anyway." So she did. They sat side by side, shoulders almost touching, reviewing page after page of design drafts and marketing notes. She spoke softly, tracing her finger along the margins as she explained her ideas, the handwritten notes, the little author stories, the moments that gave readers something real to hold on to. Liam listened, really listened, not with the detached interest of a CEO scanning for flaws, but with a quiet curiosity that surprised even him. The way she talked about stories like they were living things pulled something open in him that he'd forgotten existed. When she looked up, she found him watching her, not the screen. Their eyes met, and the air seemed to pause. What she asked, trying to sound casual. "Nothing," he said, though his voice had softened. "You just talk like you actually believe words can change people." She smiled faintly. "Don't you?" He looked away. "Used to." The room fell into a gentle silence. Only the hum of the city filled the space between them. For a while, they just worked quietly, her sketching ideas, him jotting notes, the sound of pens scratching paper weaving into the rhythm of their breaths. At some point, Emily glanced up at the clock. It was past midnight. "You should go home," she said, stifling a yawn. "Even billionaires need sleep." Liam leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "And editors." She shrugged. "We survive on caffeine and willpower." He chuckled softly, a sound she hadn't heard from him before. It was quiet, warm, almost boyish. That explains a lot. Her lips curved. "Like what?" Like why you keep arguing with me even when you know I'm right. She laughed, shaking her head. You're impossible. He smiled, a real one this time, not the calculated kind he wore in boardrooms. And yet, you're still here. For a second, she didn't know what to say, because he was right. She was still there. And it wasn't just the project keeping her. She gathered her papers, pretending to focus. I'm here because I care about this work. Don't read too much into it. I wasn't, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. They stayed like that for another hour, two people pretending to work while stealing glances when the other wasn't looking. The world outside felt far away. At one point, when she reached for a folder, their hands brushed. Just a brief touch, skin against skin, but it sent a quiet current through the air. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Emily pulled her hand back, heart thudding. Sorry, she murmured. Liam didn't answer. He just watched her, eyes steady, expression unreadable. Then he said softly, You don't have to apologize for existing. The words caught her off guard. They were so unlike him, too gentle, too human. I wasn't, she started, but he'd already looked away, focusing again on the papers in front of him. The rest of the night passed in an easy, fragile peace. When the clock struck 2, Emily finally stood, stretching. I should go. If I don't sleep soon, I'll start typing poetry into the financial reports. Liam smiled faintly. I'd actually pay to see that. She gathered her bag, slinging it over her shoulder. Good night, Mr. Prescott. He looked up, eyes catching the soft reflection of city lights on the window behind her. Good night, Emily. Her name and his voice did something to her, small, unexplainable, but real. She hesitated at the door, then glanced back once more. He was still sitting there, alone, the glow from his desk lamp catching the tired edges of his face. For the first time, he didn't look like the man who ruled a company. He just looked human. When the elevator doors closed behind her, she realized she was smiling, a quiet, bewildered smile she couldn't shake. Later, in his office, Liam leaned back in his chair, staring at the empty doorway where she'd just been. He should have gone home hours ago, but something about her voice still echoed in the room, soft, sure, alive. He turned off the lamp, the city light spilling across his desk like scattered thoughts. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful. Outside, the night stretched long and quiet. Two souls in two corners of the same city, both too awake to sleep, both thinking of the same small moment, the sound of laughter under fluorescent lights, the warmth of a touch that wasn't supposed to mean anything. And somewhere in the space between denial and desire, something fragile began to grow, something neither of them had planned for, but both were starting quietly, secretly to feel. The rain had been falling since dusk, soft and steady against the glass walls of the office. The sound filled the spaces between words, between heartbeats. It was late again, the kind of late when the city outside blurred into streaks of gold and silver. The kind of late when people stopped pretending they weren't tired or vulnerable. Only 2 lights were still on in the entire building. Emily's desk and his. She stood at the long table, her arms crossed, eyes sharp. You can't just cut the author's section like that. Liam, it's the soul of the book. Liam looked up from his laptop, his jaw tight. It's redundant. It slows the reader down. It makes them feel something, she shot back. That's what you never understand. Not everything is about speed. He leaned forward, the faint glow from the monitor catching the edge of his face. And not everything can afford sentiment. Emily, we have a deadline, a budget, and a heart. She interrupted. Remember that part. Or did you delete it with the rest of your edits? The silence that followed was heavy, too heavy. He exhaled slowly, setting his pen down. You think you know me, he said quietly, but you only see what you want to fight. Emily took a step closer, anger and something else rising together. And what is that supposed to mean? He looked at her, really looked. It means you only argue with me because you care too much. About this, about proving something. Maybe even about me. Her breath caught. Don't flatter yourself. Liam stood, his voice low now. Then tell me I'm wrong. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The air between them changed, the argument losing its edges, becoming something warmer, heavier. She could smell the faint trace of rain on his jacket, the heat of the room clinging to her skin. He took another step toward her, then another, until she could feel his breath when he spoke. You drive me crazy, he said softly, his voice rough around the edges. You argue, you challenge, you never back down. That's my job, she whispered, though her heart was no longer steady. Maybe. His eyes dropped to her lips. But you make it impossible to think straight. Before she could move, before reason could pull them apart. His hand brushed her arm, hesitant, almost asking. Then he pulled her closer and kissed her. It wasn't like the first time, not shocking or defiant. This one was quiet, slow, the kind of kiss that began with disbelief and ended with surrender. Her hands pressed against his chest, meaning to push him away, but somehow they didn't. For a few seconds, everything stilled: the rain, the lights, the air, just the rhythm of their hearts, unguarded and real. Then it hit her what she was doing, who he was. She broke the kiss abruptly, breath trembling. Don't, she said, her voice barely steady. Don't ever do that again. He blinked, as if waking from a dream. Emily. Her hand moved faster than thought. The sound of the slap cracked through the room, sharp, final. His head turned slightly, the red mark already forming on his cheek. She stood there, chest rising and falling, tears burning behind her eyes. You don't get to cross that line. Not again. He didn't speak. He didn't even move. Just watched her, the way her hands trembled, the way her voice wavered between anger and hurt. Then she grabbed her bag, her voice breaking as she whispered, "You don't get to confuse me like that," and turned for the door. Her footsteps echoed down the empty hallway. The sound faded, but it stayed in his chest like a heartbeat that wouldn't calm down. Liam stood there for a long time, staring at the door she'd just walked through. He brought a hand to his cheek, not because it hurt, but because it was the only proof that what had just happened was real. He sat back down slowly, the chair creaking under him. The rain kept falling, the city still breathing around him, but the room felt different now, too quiet, too alive. He knew he'd crossed a line. He knew he should regret it, and maybe part of him did. But deeper than that, beneath the logic, beneath the restraint, there was something else. The memory of how she'd tasted like courage and fear, like something he didn't deserve but couldn't stop wanting. He pressed his palms against his eyes, letting out a low breath. Damn it. Across the city. Emily stumbled into her apartment, soaked from the rain she hadn't even noticed. She dropped her keys, pressed her back against the door, and tried to breathe. Her reflection in the hallway mirror looked like a stranger, flushed cheeks, wild eyes, lips that still remembered. She slid down to the floor, hugging her knees. "What is wrong with me?" she whispered. She hated that she'd felt something, hated that for 1 second. She hadn't wanted him to stop. Her mind replayed every detail, the way his voice softened when he said her name, the look in his eyes before he kissed her, not out of anger, but need. It made her chest ache in a way that scared her. Hours passed, but neither of them slept. Liam sat in his dark office, watching the rain streak down the glass, his mind circling back to the same impossible thought that maybe, just maybe, what he felt when he looked at her wasn't something he could reason away. And Emily, in her small apartment miles away, lay awake on the couch, her heart refusing to listen to her mind. Both of them knew the same truth, though neither would admit it, that something had changed, that no matter how hard they tried, no matter how far they ran from it, nothing between them would ever be the same again. And outside, the rain kept falling soft, endless, patient, as if the sky itself understood that love, like storms, never asks for permission before it begins. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Emily's apartment, spilling across her small dining table, scattered with half-read manuscripts and a chipped mug of coffee. She'd been trying all morning to ignore the restless ache that had lived in her chest since that night, the kiss, the slap, the silence that followed. She hadn't seen Liam since, and she preferred it that way. Or at least, she told herself she did. She wanted normal again, quiet mornings, her own coffee, her own breathing space. But life, as always, had other plans. It started with the sound of moving boxes in the hallway, the low rumble of a dolly wheel, a man's voice giving short instructions. She barely noticed at first until the voice became clearer, unmistakable, deep, calm, familiar enough to make her heart stop mid-beat. No, it couldn't be. She froze, mug halfway to her lips. Slowly, she walked to the door and peeked through the peephole. And there he was, Liam Prescott, in jeans and a dark gray t-shirt, sleeves rolled up, carrying a box like he wasn't one of the most powerful CEOs in the city. Emily blinked twice, hoping exhaustion was playing tricks on her. But he didn't disappear. He looked up just then, straight at her door. For a second, she thought he'd somehow seen her through the tiny circle of glass. His mouth curved, just a little. A knock followed, calm, predictable, infuriating. She waited, didn't answer. Another knock. Finally, she opened the door just a crack. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, as if he'd been expecting that exact question. Moving in, her heart sank. Moving in, where he gestured behind him. Across the hall, Unit 1407. Emily stared, speechless. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious," he said. "You should know that by now." She closed her eyes for a second, muttering something under her breath she hoped he couldn't hear. "Out of every building in San Francisco, you chose this one." He shrugged. Great location, quiet, convenient. Then, with a deliberate pause, "Good neighbors," her jaw dropped. "Unbelievable. Coincidence," he said, though his tone made it sound anything but. "Coincidences don't come with moving trucks," she said flatly. He smirked. Maybe fate has a sense of humor. She exhaled, stepped back, and let the door close slowly in his face. But the moment it clicked shut, she pressed her forehead against it and groaned. For the rest of the day, she pretended he didn't exist. She tried to focus on work, on deadlines, on anything that didn't involve his voice echoing down the hallway. But every few hours, she heard something: footsteps, a door closing, the faint clink of dishes, and her mind filled in the rest. That evening, she ran into him again. In the elevator. Of course. She'd just stepped in, wearing an oversized sweater and carrying a grocery bag, when the door slid open again, and there he was. Liam stepped inside, hands in his pockets, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "Evening, neighbor." Emily forced a polite smile. "Don't start." "Start what, this?" she said, gesturing vaguely between them. "Whatever game you're playing." He leaned against the elevator wall, eyes glinting. "I'm not playing anything. I just happen to live here now." The doors closed. Silence filled the small space. She could feel the electricity hum in the air, that same infuriating tension that followed them everywhere. He broke it first. "You know," he said, voice low, "I'm starting to think you're avoiding me." She glanced up at him, her tone sharp but her pulse betraying her. "I wonder why?" Liam smiled softly. "You slap a man once, and suddenly he's the villain." Her eyes widened. "You kissed me without permission?" He met her gaze without flinching. "And I regret the way it happened, not the reason it did." For a moment, the elevator seemed smaller, the air thinner. She looked away. "You don't get to rewrite it." "I'm not trying to," he said. His voice was softer now, less armor, more honesty. "I'm just saying some mistakes don't come from anger. Some come from wanting something you shouldn't. The elevator dinged, the doors opened. Emily stepped out quickly, her breath catching. She didn't turn back, but as she fumbled with her keys, she heard his door open across the hall, then close again. For the next few weeks, their lives fell into an odd rhythm. They saw each other in passing at the mailboxes, in the lobby, on the balcony when the night was too beautiful to stay inside. He'd nod, she'd nod back. Sometimes he'd say something teasing a dry comment about her endless coffee supply or how she talked to her plants. Sometimes she'd roll her eyes and tell him he should try smiling like a normal person. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she'd catch him glancing across the balcony, just long enough to notice. It was strange, this quiet companionship born from coincidence and avoidance. He never pushed, she never invited, but somehow their walls began to soften. One night, she was sitting outside with a blanket and a cup of tea, the city lights spread out like a galaxy below. Liam stepped onto his balcony, phone in hand. He saw her, hesitated, then said, "You're up late, so are you," she said without looking over. "Working, liar." He smiled faintly. Fine. Thinking about what he leaned on the railing, about how strange it is. I used to look at this skyline and see numbers. Now I just see stories. She looked at him then. The distance between their balconies was only a few feet, but in that moment, it felt closer. "Maybe you're catching the disease," she said quietly. "The one where you start to feel things." He laughed softly. "If that's what this is, I think it's terminal." Emily shook her head, smiling despite herself. "You're impossible." "Still true," he said. They stood there for a long while, the city breathing quietly beneath them. Two silhouettes framed by warm light, pretending they weren't slowly falling into something neither of them wanted to name. Later, when she went inside, she leaned against the balcony door and caught herself smiling, just a little, and across the hall, in the dim light of his apartment. Liam poured himself a glass of water, his reflection faint in the window. He told himself it was nothing, just proximity, just coincidence. But when he caught himself glancing toward her balcony again, he realized he didn't believe that anymore. Outside, the city lights blinked softly, as if they too were keeping a secret. The cafe on Montgomery Street was glowing that night, small lights strung across the ceiling, music humming low, laughter spilling from every corner. Emily sat at the long wooden table near the window, surrounded by her college friends, the kind of people who remembered her when her biggest worry was missing a deadline for the school paper. They were loud, warm, and relentlessly curious. "Come on, Em," her friend Rachel teased, stirring her drink. "It's been, 2 years since your last real date," Emily laughed weakly, hoping the topic would pass. "Maybe 3. I've been busy avoiding men," someone else chimed in, and the table erupted in laughter. Emily rolled her eyes, taking a slow sip of her wine. She didn't want to talk about dates or relationships, especially not tonight. Especially not when the image of Liam Prescott, her infuriating, confusing, too close for comfort neighbor, had a way of sneaking into her thoughts whenever she least expected it. Rachel leaned in with a grin. "Actually, I was going to set you up with someone, a lawyer, very smart, my coworker." Emily nearly choked on her drink. "No, absolutely not. Why not? He's nice, successful, polite. That's not the problem." Emily set her glass down, her heart racing for reasons she didn't fully understand. "I already have someone." The table went silent. Rachel blinked. "Wait, what?" Emily froze. The words had slipped out before she could stop them. "I already have someone." She could feel every pair of eyes on her now, waiting. Her brain scrambled. "It's new," she said quickly. "We're keeping it quiet." The disbelief was immediate. "Who is he? Do we know him?" "You never said anything." Emily forced a smile, praying the ground would swallow her whole. "He's just someone I met through work." "Name?" Rachel asked, leaning forward like a detective. Emily opened her mouth and then heard it. That deep, calm voice behind her. "Liam," he said smoothly. "Liam Prescott." Time stopped. Every head turned as Liam stepped up beside her table, his black coat still glistening from the drizzle outside. He looked effortlessly composed, like he'd walked out of a movie scene. Emily's heart thudded so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. Rachel's eyes widened. "Wait, the Liam Prescott. The one and only," he said, sliding into the seat beside Emily as if he'd been invited. His hand rested casually on the back of her chair, his tone impossibly calm. "Sorry I'm late, sweetheart. Traffic was a nightmare." "Sweetheart." Emily nearly forgot how to breathe. He glanced at her then, a quick, secret look that said, "Go with it." Her brain was chaos. Right. You made it." Rachel's jaw dropped. "You two are?" Liam smiled, the kind of smile that could disarm a room. "Together, yes." He reached for Emily's hand under the table. His touch was steady, warm, a silent promise not to let her sink alone in this mess. The group erupted in disbelief, laughter, excitement. Rachel clapped her hands. "Oh my God, this is unreal. You didn't tell us you were dating him." Emily forced a nervous laugh. "Well, it's complicated." "Complicated," Liam echoed, amusement in his voice. That's her favorite word lately. Emily shot him a look, but he only smiled wider. Dinner continued, a blur of questions and teasing. Liam answered most of them effortlessly, smoothly, like he'd been doing this all his life. He talked about how they met in a very unexpected way. He said with a knowing glance that made Emily nearly choke about how she challenged him, kept him grounded, how he admired her stubbornness. Every word felt half truth, half confession, and somehow she didn't stop him. At one point, Rachel leaned over and whispered, "You two are perfect. The way you look at each other, it's ridiculous." Emily's pulse stuttered. She wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but when she glanced at Liam, his eyes were already on her, and for a moment, just a breath. She forgot it was all an act. Then came the moment that ended the night or started something neither of them could undo. Rachel lifted her glass. To Emily and Liam, the power couple none of us saw coming. Everyone cheered. Emily blushed, shaking her head. No, you don't have to." But before she could finish, Liam leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. It wasn't a long kiss, but it wasn't brief either. Just enough to silence the table, just enough for her pulse to lose its rhythm. His lips were warm, steady. Sure, not the reckless kiss from before, but something deeper. Something real. When he pulled back, his hand was still at her jaw, his voice low enough only she could hear. "You're welcome." She stared at him, speechless, the world spinning softly around them. The others clapped, laughed, cheered. Rachel even wiped a pretend tear. Finally, my matchmaking skills weren't needed after all. Emily smiled, or tried to. But inside, she was trembling. Later, when the dinner ended and the others drifted out into the night, she finally turned to him outside the cafe. The rain had stopped, the air thick with city light. "What the hell was that?" she asked, her voice low. He slipped his hands into his pockets, eyes calm. "You said you had a boyfriend. I was just helping make it believable. I didn't ask you to." "No," he said, stepping closer, his voice softer now. "But you didn't stop me either." Her breath caught. For a long moment, neither moved. The sounds of the city faded, a car horn, a laugh, a distant train. Only the quiet space between them remained, alive with things neither of them could name. Finally, Emily took a step back. "Don't ever do that again." He smiled faintly. "You've said that before." She glared, but he was already walking away, hands still in his pockets, his stride easy, confident. When she reached her apartment later, her reflection in the mirror startled her flushed cheeks, bright eyes, a small, unshakable smile she didn't remember putting there. Across the hall, Liam poured himself a drink, still tasting the faint trace of her lipstick, still hearing her laugh. Neither of them slept that night. And though Emily told herself it had all been an act, just a convenient lie, her heart refused to believe it, because the truth was simple and dangerous for a man who never did anything by accident. Liam Prescott had just kissed her like he meant it. The week after the dinner felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. Emily told herself it was for the best that things had gone too far, that pretending had blurred something real. She kept her distance. No late-night balcony talks, no stolen glances in the elevator. She even changed her routine, timing her mornings so she wouldn't accidentally run into him in the hallway. And yet, her heart still seemed to recognize his footsteps before her mind did. That Friday night, the universe decided to play one of its small, cruel jokes. She was coming home late, arms full of grocery bags, rain dripping from her coat when she stepped into the elevator. The doors began to close, and then a hand caught them. She didn't even need to look up to know. Liam stepped in, holding his phone, eyes meeting hers just long enough to make her pulse quicken. "Evening," he said quietly. "Hi," she managed, her voice careful, polite. The doors slid shut, sealing them into that small, humming space. She told herself it was fine. 20 floors, maybe 30 seconds. She could handle that. But somewhere between the 12th and 13th floor, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then everything stopped. The elevator jolted slightly, then went still. Emily blinked into the sudden silence. Wait, did it? Just Liam pressed the emergency button. Waited. Nothing. He tried again. Still nothing? "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered. He exhaled slowly. Perfect. They stood there in the dim glow of the emergency light, both trying not to look as uneasy as they felt. "It's fine," she said after a moment. "They'll fix it in a few minutes." "Sure," he said, but his voice was quieter, his jaw tighter. Something in his posture shifted, his shoulders tensed, his breathing shallow. She frowned. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on the metal door, his hand clenched around his phone. Liam. He turned his head slightly, but his eyes weren't quite focused. "I'm fine," he said, though it didn't sound like it. She stepped closer. "You don't look fine." He drew in a shaky breath. "I just don't like small spaces." Her chest softened. Claustrophobic. He hesitated. Something like that. The light above them flickered again, and for a brief second, his face looked almost boyish, not the man who commanded boardrooms, but someone smaller, trapped in a memory. Emily took another slow step toward him. "Hey, look at me." He didn't move. She said it again, softer this time. "Liam, look at me." Finally, he did. His eyes met hers wide, uncertain, stripped of every layer of confidence she'd ever seen him wear. "Breathe," she said quietly. "With me, in and out." He followed her rhythm. Once, twice, slowly. His shoulders eased. They stood like that for a long while, just the two of them, breathing in sync, the faint hum of the city far below. After a moment, he leaned back against the wall, exhaling. "I was 8, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Got stuck in an elevator for almost 2 hours. Power outage. My mom was outside the whole time. I could hear her crying, but I couldn't answer. I thought I'd die before they got it open." Emily's heart ached. That must have been terrifying. He gave a small, humorless laugh. "After that, I swore I'd never freeze up again, in anything. But sometimes..." He trailed off. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She wasn't used to him like this, open, human. She wanted to say something, but the words felt too heavy. So instead, she reached out slow, tentative, and touched his hand. His fingers were cold. He looked down at them, then back at her. "It's just the two of us," she said softly, "and we're safe." "Okay." He nodded, his eyes holding hers like an anchor. They stayed that way quiet, close as the minutes stretched into something almost gentle. The hum of the elevator, the soft glow of light on her face, the rhythm of breathing slowly finding balance again. At some point, she started to laugh, just a little. What he asked, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Of all the people to get stuck with in an elevator." He raised an eyebrow. "You mean lucky?" "Sure," she teased. "Let's call it that." He smiled then, small, real, unguarded. It made her chest ache in a way she didn't expect. Minutes later, the elevator hummed to life. The lights brightened. It began to move again. Neither of them said anything as the numbers ticked upward. When the doors finally opened on their floor, they both stepped out, the air suddenly colder, emptier. "Well," she said softly, trying to sound casual, "guess you survived." He turned to her, his voice quiet. "Because of you." She looked up at him, startled, but he wasn't teasing. His gaze was steady, sincere. "Good night, Liam," she said, because she didn't trust her voice to say anything else. "Good night, Emily." As she unlocked her door, she could still feel his presence behind her, that strange warmth that lingered long after he was gone. Inside her apartment, she leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, and exhaled. The memory of his hand in hers replayed, slow and vivid. She could still feel the faint tremor in his fingers, the way his breath steadied because of her. Across the hall, Liam stood by his window, watching the rain start again. For years, silence had been his armor, control his constant companion. But tonight, he'd let someone see the cracks. And somehow, it didn't feel like weakness. He found himself glancing toward her balcony, the faint light still glowing through her curtains. For the first time, he didn't want to look away. Somewhere between fear and trust, something fragile had shifted. The wall between them, the one built from pride, from distance, from denial, had begun to crack. And through that small, unexpected opening, the first hint of something tender slipped quietly in. It was one of those evenings when the city seemed to hum softly to itself, a low rhythm of car lights and distant laughter. Emily sat on her balcony with a book she wasn't really reading, the pages turning only because her hands needed something to do. Ever since that night in the elevator, something had changed between her and Liam. The silence between them wasn't sharp anymore. It had softened, like the space between two notes in a slow song. She'd started to see the man behind the titles, the one who smiled, just barely. When the coffee shop barista added too much sugar to his drink, the one who paused to listen to street musicians on his way home. It unsettled her, this quiet warmth sneaking into her thoughts. That evening, her phone buzzed with a message from a colleague at the publishing house, a photo of an old newspaper headline. "Tech prodigy's engagement ends amid corporate betrayal." The names beneath the bold letters made her heart twist. Liam Prescott and Vanessa Moore. She hadn't meant to pry, but her thumb scrolled down anyway. The article was short, clinical, the kind that stripped heartbreak into data points. It spoke of a failed merger, a financial scandal, and a fiancé who'd left with both a rival executive and a chunk of his company's shares. No mention of love, no mention of the silence that must have followed. She sat still for a long moment, the soft hum of the city washing over her. For the first time, she understood why he guarded himself so carefully, why he built walls out of logic and precision. Later that night, she stepped out onto the balcony again. Across from her, Liam was there, sleeves rolled up, a glass of whiskey catching the city's glow. Their eyes met, almost by accident. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "You either." He gave a half smile. "Sleep's overrated." For a while, neither spoke. The distance between their balconies felt smaller than ever, though the air was thick with the things neither dared to say. Finally, Emily set her book aside. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up, cautious. "Depends. What happened to you?" The question hung there quiet, but heavy enough to stop the night. Liam didn't move for a long time. She thought he wouldn't answer. Then, softly, he said, "You've been reading old news." She hesitated, not on purpose. It just found me? He nodded once, then stared out at the skyline. It's fine. It's all ancient history, but his voice told a different story. Emily waited. She didn't push, didn't fill the silence. Sometimes quiet was the only space someone needed to trust. After a while, he spoke again, slower this time, like each word cost him something. Her name was Vanessa. We started together college, internships, dreams too big for what we knew. We built the company side by side. Everyone thought we'd make it, the business, the marriage, all of it. He paused, taking a slow sip of his drink. Then one day, I found out she'd been building something else, with someone else. His jaw tightened, the faintest crack in his composure. They took the deal, the investors, half the code base, everything we'd worked for, and she didn't even say goodbye. Emily felt something tighten in her chest. Liam, he smiled faintly, not bitter, just tired. That's when I learned something useful. If you don't expect anything, you don't lose anything. She studied him, the way his shoulders seemed to carry years that didn't belong to his age. "Do you believe that I did?" he said quietly. "Until lately." Their eyes met. The air between them shifted. For a long while, neither spoke. The city went on breathing around them, the low hum of traffic, the rhythm of life moving forward even when hearts stayed behind. Emily crossed her arms against the cool air. "You know, it's okay to still hurt, to still care." He looked at her, then really looked, and for the first time, the distance in his eyes melted away. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," she admitted. "But pretending you don't feel anything, that's harder." He laughed softly, the sound quiet and cracked. "You always have an answer, don't you?" "Not always," she said, smiling a little. "Just for you." A small silence settled, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable anymore. Liam turned his glass in his hand, watching the reflections ripple. "When I was younger, I thought love meant trust. Now I think it's about courage to try again, even when you've already lost." Emily's throat tightened. "That's brave." He shrugged, or stupid. "Maybe both," she said gently. Their laughter mingled in the air, soft and almost fragile. After a while, he leaned against the railing, looking across at her balcony. "You know what's strange? What I spent years building something that would make me feel safe, power, control, success, and yet, sitting here talking to you, that's the first time it actually feels that way." Her breath caught. The wind carried his words across the short distance like a secret she wasn't sure she was meant to hear. She didn't answer. She couldn't. But she smiled, a quiet, grateful smile that said everything she couldn't put into words. The night stretched on, the air between them gentle, forgiving. When Emily finally went inside, she lingered by the door, one hand over her heart. Across the way, Liam watched her light go out, the warmth of her laughter still echoing faintly in his ears. He set his glass down, closed his eyes, and exhaled. For the first time in years, the memories of betrayal didn't sting as much. The ghosts of the past felt softer. Because somehow, this woman across the balcony had taken his silence, his broken trust, and turned them into something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. And though neither said it aloud, they both knew. Something inside them had quietly begun to heal. The morning felt light for the first time in a long time. Emily woke to soft sun sliding across her hardwood floor, the city still quiet, the kettle beginning its small whistle. She moved slower than usual, let the mug warm her palms, let the steam touch her face. Last night's balcony words lingered in her chest like a low, steady drum, not loud, just there. She caught herself humming as she buttoned her blouse. It surprised her. She didn't stop. The lobby of Bayline smelled like paper and citrus cleaner. She balanced a box of author proofs against her hip, nodded to the receptionist, and stepped into the elevator. 22 floors, and she would bury herself in a day of work. Pages to mark, calls to make, simple things, safe things. The elevator opened to the main atrium first, a wide space of glass and white oak and a long, living wall of green that made the air feel softer. She almost didn't hear his voice at first, just a thread of sound in the hum of morning. Then she did, clean, familiar, close. Her steps slowed, across the atrium, near the wall of green. Liam stood with a woman in a pale camel coat, tall, dark hair brushed into a smooth wave. A profile Emily recognized from articles she wished she'd never read. Vanessa. The name landed like a pebble dropped into deep water. No splash, only rings that slowly widened until everything inside her moved. Emily didn't mean to look. She didn't mean to listen. But the world narrowed to that corner, to his hand half lifted in emphasis, to the woman's laugh that was almost a purr. Vanessa leaned in, fingers resting too easily at Liam's sleeve, her wrist glittering with a thin gold bracelet that caught the light and threw it back like a dare. "Just 10 minutes," Vanessa was saying, voice bright, sign, and we're both free. Emily swallowed, the box of proofs suddenly heavier. Free. The word snagged. She shifted her weight, took one small step backward, the rubber soles of her flats whispering against the floor. Liam's posture was careful, polite. He nodded once, said something she couldn't hear, then glanced past Vanessa's shoulder in that searching way a person does when they sense movement. For one breath. His gaze skimmed the space where Emily stood. She didn't know if he saw her. She wasn't sure she wanted him to. Vanessa closed the distance like she'd been born to it. A light touch at his forearm. A smile that didn't reach her eyes. And then the smallest thing. The thing that shouldn't have mattered, and somehow did. She rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Familiar. Easy. As if no time had passed at all. The room tilted. Not violently, not with sound. Just a quiet slide, like a picture frame giving up on a nail. Emily felt the heat drain from her face. She took another step back, the proofs wobbling in her arms. Someone brushed past her, and she murmured an apology to no one, to everyone. The elevator behind her chimed, doors gliding open. She moved because moving was the only thing her body knew how to do. She didn't look back. Inside the elevator, her reflection stared pale and steady from the gold-toned doors. She managed to press the button to 22 with a hand that wasn't steady at all. The doors began to close. A palm slid between them at the last second. Liam, Emily. His voice caught on her name, not quite breathless, not quite composed. She kept her eyes on the numbers above the door. "You're blocking it?" He stepped in anyway. The doors closed, sealing them into a quiet that hummed. "I didn't," he began. "It's fine," she said, too quickly. "You don't owe me an explanation." "That's not what I'm trying to say." "Then don't say anything at all." The elevator climbed, 12, 13, her pulse in her wrists. He stood a careful arm's length away, as if the air itself might shatter. "It was a business meeting," he said finally. "Paperwork, old things. We were closing." "She kissed you," Emily said, and hated the way the sentence sounded like a truth a child would bring to a parent. Obvious, fragile. He exhaled, on the cheek. "And I?" The doors opened at 22. She stepped out before the words could reach her. "We've got a deadline, Mr. Prescott," she said, the formality catching in her throat. "I'll send edits by noon." He didn't follow. The doors closed on whatever his face was doing. She was grateful for that. The corridor to editorial was colder than usual. Emily found her office, set the proofs on the desk, and closed the door with a soft click that felt too loud. She stood for a long second with her forehead against the wood, eyes closed, breath measured like stitches. On her desk, her notebook waited. The leather was warm under her palm. She opened it to a blank page. The pen hovered, then landed, one line, then another. Don't make someone your home if they're still learning how to live in their own. She read it once, twice. It steadied nothing and everything at the same time. The morning moved on, indifferent, emails stacked. Karen knocked and talked about budgets and launch dates and the author who wanted to move a comma and destroy a paragraph. Emily nodded at all the right places. She could perform competence like a well-worn coat. Inside, her chest felt like someone had pulled a thread and didn't know how to stop. At noon, she sent the edits. Neat, clean, professional. She didn't add a note. Her phone lit once. Liam, can we talk? She couldn't make her thumb move. She flipped the phone face down and pretended that was a decision. At 3, she gathered her things early, told Karen she was taking the afternoon to check on author pages at home. Karen's brows knit, then softened. Get some rest, she said, and Emily knew she must have looked worse than she thought. The sky had shifted by the time she reached the street. A thin fog crept in from the bay, softening the hard edges of buildings, making the city look like a memory. She walked fast because slow would mean feeling too much. Her shoes counted the blocks in a language only the tired understand. Upstairs, the hallway held the faint smell of paint and someone's dinner. She unlocked her door, stepped in, clicked the deadbolt with a small finality that made her bite the inside of her cheek. She set her bag on the chair, moved to the balcony without thinking, then stopped. Across the way, Liam's curtains were half open, an angle of glass that showed a sliver of room, a darker shape that might have been him or might have been a shadow. She pulled her curtains closed, not violently, gentle, firm. In the kitchen, she set water to boil and never made the tea. She wiped the same clean counter twice. She put 3 books in a stack and moved them to another stack, and somehow that felt like doing something. When the kettle clicked off, the kitchen fell too quiet again. Her phone buzzed once more on the table. Liam, please. She silenced it. Not to punish, to survive. Evening dropped its shoulder against the city. The fog thickened, turned the view into a wash of gray and pearl. At some point, she changed into a sweater too big for her and curled on the couch, knees to her chest, a blanket pulled high. She wasn't crying. There would be relief in that. She was simply sitting very still, the way a person does when they're trying not to disturb the ache. A soft knock at her door came just after 9. She didn't move. Another knock, quieter, like someone was trying to be heard without waking an entire floor. Emily, his voice said through the door, low enough the hallway wouldn't catch it. It's not what you think. She closed her eyes. The words pressed against her skin and didn't go in. I'll be out here, he added after a beat, something like determination wrapped in apology. If you want the truth. Silence folded back over the hall. The refrigerator hummed and clicked. Somewhere below, a siren drifted and fell away. She stayed on the couch. The kettle light blinked in the dark like a patient heartbeat. Minutes lengthened into a slow hour. The knock didn't come again. She pictured him leaning against the opposite wall, hands in his pockets, something like regret weighing his shoulders down. She hated that she could picture it at all. She hated that part of her wanted to open the door just to cover his hands with hers and say, "You don't have to talk. Not yet." Instead, she stood, crossed the room, and turned the lock so quietly the metal barely sounded. She set her palm against the door, cool, solid, between. Not tonight, she whispered, to him, to herself, to the old fear that had just learned a new name. Across the way, a light shifted in his apartment, a faint movement behind glass. He was still there. She could feel it the way a person feels weather in their bones. She went back to the couch and pulled the blanket up again. Outside, fog licked the building, patient as tide. She fixed her eyes on the shadowed ceiling and tried to remember how to breathe like it didn't hurt. On the balcony, a plant leaf tapped the glass once, then settled. The city kept its own time. Down the hall, the elevator sighed and stilled. When sleep finally came, it did not bring mercy, only the blurry image of a kiss that wasn't hers, and the soft echo of a door that hadn't opened. In the morning, she would wake to a small box leaning against the frame with a note tucked under its string. But for now, the night held her in its quiet palm, and the last thing she heard was the sound of her own heartbeat folding into the dark, steady and stubborn, refusing to give up the one thing it had started to believe. The night pressed heavy against the city, the kind of quiet that only comes after rain. The hallway outside Emily's apartment was dim, washed in the pale glow of the single light above the elevator. She lay on her couch, still in the sweater from the night before, half awake, half waiting for something she didn't want to admit she was waiting for. It started as a soft sound one, 2, 3 knocks, careful, hesitant, familiar. She didn't move. Maybe if she stayed still long enough. Whoever it was would go away. But the knock came again, slower this time, like a heartbeat asking permission to exist. Her chest tightened. She already knew. On the other side of the door, Liam sat with his back against the wall, legs stretched out, a small white box beside him, tied with red string. The kind of bakery box that smelled faintly of butter and strawberries. He had been there for hours, long enough for the tile beneath him to leach the warmth from his body, long enough for the world outside to go still. He wasn't expecting her to open the door. He just needed her to know he hadn't left. Inside. Emily pressed her hands to her knees, trying to will her heart to slow down. She didn't want to see him. She didn't want the sound of his voice to undo the distance she'd spent all day building. And yet, she stood. Emily. His voice came low and rough. "I know you're there." She didn't answer. "I won't ask you to forgive me," he said. "I just need you to know the truth." His words fell soft, the way a confession does when it's already broken. She showed up out of nowhere. "Vanessa." She said she wanted to close old accounts, tie up what was left. "I thought I could handle it. I didn't think it mattered anymore." He laughed under his breath, bitter and tired. "Turns out I was wrong because it mattered to you. And that's the only thing that mattered to me." Emily leaned her forehead against the door, eyes closed. "I should have walked away." He continued quietly. "I should have told her no the moment she said my name, but I didn't. And then you saw what you saw." His voice cracked slightly on the next words. "You have every right to hate me." Silence filled the hall again, a long, aching pause that felt like the world had stopped breathing. When he spoke next, his tone was different, lower, softer, the sound of something fragile giving in. "Emily," he whispered, "I can't." He stopped, swallowed hard, then tried again. "I can't do this without you." Her eyes burned. She gripped the doorknob, every muscle in her hand trembling. "You think I'm good at being alone," he said, "but I'm not. I just got used to it. You changed that. You made the quiet feel like peace instead of punishment." He let out a small breath, his head dropping back against the wall. "I haven't slept. I can't eat. Hell, I bought that stupid strawberry tart you like because I thought maybe sweetness could fix what I ruined." The box sat beside him like a tiny apology. Its ribbon had come loose. Inside, Emily wiped at her cheeks, surprised to find them wet. She hated how much she wanted to open that door, how much she wanted to believe him. He shifted slightly, wincing at the stiffness in his legs. "You don't have to let me in," he said quietly. "I'll stay out here as long as it takes. Just don't shut me out forever." She didn't answer. The hallway settled back into stillness, broken only by the soft creak of him leaning forward. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, "I love you." 3 words, barely audible. But they found her anyway. She turned the knob before she even knew she'd done it. The door opened just enough for the hallway light to spill across the floor, catching the edge of his face. His hair was damp from the mist, his eyes tired, ringed with something rawer than regret. He blinked, almost like he didn't believe she was standing there. "You opened the door." Her voice was quiet, steady in a way her heart wasn't. "You look terrible." He let out a breath that was half laugh, half relief. "You should see the other guy." "Who's the other guy?" Me, he said simply. For the first time that night, she smiled small, fleeting, but real. She looked down at the little white box beside him. You really brought tart from that bakery on 4th, he said, the one that always runs out before noon. She shook her head. You remember ridiculous things. I remember everything about you, he said softly, even the things I shouldn't. For a long moment, neither spoke, just the low hum of the building, the faint tap of rain against the window at the end of the hall. Emily's hand tightened on the doorknob. I'm still angry. I know. I don't forgive you. I know that too. She hesitated, then stepped back just enough for him to see the space beyond her, the soft light, the blanket on the couch, the smallness of a life she'd tried to build without him. But it's cold out here. He looked up, something breaking open in his chest. Emily, she cut him off gently. Don't say anything else. Just come in before you freeze. He stood slowly, the ache in his knees pulling him back to his body. When he picked up the box, the ribbon slipped free completely. He paused at the threshold, meeting her eyes one last time, searching for permission, for grace, for something human to hold on to. She nodded once, and that was enough. He stepped inside, quiet as a prayer. She closed the door behind him, the sound soft, final, but not in the way endings sound. In the silence that followed, the city seemed to exhale. They didn't talk right away. They didn't need to. She set the tart on the table. He watched her move the same hands that had once thrown him out, now offering him a plate. When she finally sat down across from him, she said, You have a lot to explain. He smiled faintly. I'll spend the rest of my life doing that if you let me. Don't start with forever, she murmured. Start with tonight. He nodded. Tonight. Then, outside. The rain began again, soft and forgiving, tapping gently against the windows as if the sky itself had decided to give them another chance. And for the first time in days, the light inside Emily's apartment stayed on past midnight. The morning sunlight came late that day, hesitant, as if the sky itself wasn't sure whether to shine. Emily woke to the sound of her phone buzzing endlessly on the nightstand. At first, she ignored it, rolling deeper into the blankets, half listening to the hum of the city below. But the sound didn't stop. It grew more insistent, more urgent, until something in her chest told her she couldn't hide from it. When she finally reached for the phone, the first thing she saw was a message from Karen. Don't read the article? Her stomach dropped. She read it anyway. The headline glared at her from a glossy digital screen, bold, cruel, and too neatly written to be real. Emily Carter's meteoric rise, thanks to Prescott's pillow talk beneath it. A grainy photo of her and Liam from the company event 2 weeks ago. She was laughing, head tilted back, and he was leaning in, eyes soft in that way only she knew. The kind of picture that could tell any story someone wanted it to tell. Her hand went cold. She scrolled. The words that followed were worse. Anonymous sources. Rumors about favoritism. The implication that every project, every idea, every late night she had given her heart to wasn't hers at all. She set the phone down. The air in her apartment suddenly felt heavy, like it had too much in it, too many eyes, too much noise. She pressed her palms to her knees and breathed in, out, once, twice. Then came the calls, her email, the messages. Are you okay from friends? We're handling it. From PR. You should take a few days off. From HR. Each one made her chest tighten just a little more. She didn't take the day off. By 9:30, she was in the office, head high, shoulders straight. The hallway conversation stopped when she passed. The air felt sharper there, full of whispers dressed in perfume and coffee. Karen met her by the elevators, eyes wide with worry. You shouldn't have come. If I don't, Emily said softly, they'll think it's true. Karen hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside. Inside her office, the blinds were half drawn, the screen still open to spreadsheets and page proofs. 1,000 tiny things waiting for her attention. She dropped her bag, sat down, and stared at the blinking cursor. Her reflection looked back from the glass, tired, pale, but steady. She typed an email to her team, outlining the next week's schedule, the deadlines, the tasks, every word a lifeline to normalcy, to dignity, to control. The day dragged on. The buzz didn't fade. Online, the story grew, arms reshared, reworded, reimagined, photos cropped, captions twisted, her inbox filled with offers for comment she'd never give. At noon, Liam called. She didn't answer. He called again. Then came the message, "Please let me fix this." She stared at it for a long time before replying, "You can't," and she meant it. Not because he didn't want to help, but because this was hers now. The fight for her name, her work, her worth. She needed to stand in it alone. That afternoon, she went to the break room. Two junior editors stopped talking when she entered. Their eyes darted to the floor. One muttered, "I didn't believe it," but the words were small and brittle. Emily poured herself a cup of coffee, ignoring the tremor in her hand. She wanted to scream, to throw the mug, to demand they look her in the eye, but she didn't. She took one slow sip and said quietly, "You'll learn something one day. Silence isn't always guilt." Then she walked out. Hours passed. The city outside shifted from blue to gold to the dull gray of evening. When everyone else had gone home, Emily was still there, the only light in a floor of empty desks. Her screen glowed faintly against the glass. Her reflection caught between two worlds, one that doubted her and one that still believed. She read over her notes for the upcoming release. Her fingers moved steadily, underlining, editing, rebuilding, because that's what she did. She rebuilt behind her. The elevator dinged, footsteps. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. "I told you not to come," she said softly. Liam's voice was quiet. "And I told you I wouldn't let you face this alone." She turned then, meeting his eyes. They were tired, shadowed. "It's already done. You showing up just makes it worse. Emily, they think I'm here because of you. Don't prove them right." He stepped closer, the weight of everything between them hanging in the air. "They can write whatever they want. I know the truth. You earned everything. You've earned more than this." She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her. "Truth doesn't matter when people prefer stories." He went quiet. The hum of the lights filled the space between them. "I want to protect you," he said finally. "I don't need protection," she whispered. "I need respect." Her words landed like a quiet thunder. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he nodded slowly, painfully, and said, "Then show them who you are." She met his gaze, something fierce sparking behind her eyes. "I will." The next morning, she walked into the conference room like she owned it, not with arrogance, but with grace. Her team sat in uneasy silence, the buzz of rumor still thick in the air. She opened her laptop, started the meeting without preamble. "Today, we talk about the launch, about the authors, about the stories that matter. I won't waste another minute on gossip." Her tone left no room for doubt. Karen smiled faintly from across the table. The others followed, first hesitant, then certain. One by one, they nodded. By the end of the meeting, they were back to talking deadlines, design proofs, marketing plans, real work, real worth. That night, when the building was quiet again, Emily stood by the window, watching the city pulse below. Her reflection looked stronger somehow, not untouched but unbroken. Her phone buzzed once more, a new article, this one from a quiet independent blog in defense of Emily Carter, talent beyond the headlines. No photo, no gossip, just words. Honest ones. She smiled small but real and whispered to herself, "Let them talk." Outside, the city lights flickered against the glass, each one a pulse of life refusing to dim, and somewhere deep inside her, she knew storms come to test what's built to last. This time, she wouldn't bend. The morning of the launch felt like the kind of day the world holds its breath for soft light pouring through glass. The city hushed, waiting. Emily stood backstage, the air filled with the faint hum of microphones being tested, the rustle of papers, the low buzz of conversation from hundreds of voices blending into one nervous symphony. The auditorium gleamed rows of journalists, editors, and industry leaders gathered under the glow of stage lights. Banners lined the walls. Prescott Innovations, X, Bayline, Publishing, the future of reading. The words made her heart twist. Somewhere behind that slogan was everything she'd fought for, everything she almost lost. Karen straightened her blazer beside her, whispering, "You look calm." "I'm not," Emily murmured, half smiling. "Then you hide it well." Emily's hands fidgeted with the papers she was holding her notes for the Q&A, though she knew she wouldn't need them. She wasn't here to speak today. This was Liam's stage, his company, his voice. And yet, every step that had led to this moment had been hers too. The ideas, the pages, the late nights, they were all pieces of her woven into this project. The host began to speak, introducing Liam with the kind of polished enthusiasm that came naturally to public relations. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Liam Prescott, CEO of Prescott Innovations." Applause rippled through the room. Cameras flashed as Liam walked out under the lights, tall, composed. Every inch the man the press called the billionaire visionary. But Emily, watching from behind the curtain, could see the faint tension in his jaw, the careful rhythm of his breathing. He wasn't as calm as he looked. He reached the podium. The applause faded. He looked down at his notes, then folded them, setting them aside. His voice, when it came, was steady, quiet, deliberate. "Good morning," he began. "Today isn't just about technology or innovation. It's about what connects us, stories, the way they remind us who we are." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. He paused, scanning the crowd and for a heartbeat. His gaze drifted past the lights, to the shadowed edge of the stage where Emily stood. Something softened in his eyes. "I've spent most of my life believing that progress meant leaving the past behind." He continued, "That efficiency was more important than emotion. That profit was the only measure of success." He stopped for a moment, his fingers tightening against the podium. "And then someone proved me wrong." A quiet stirred through the room, the kind of silence that leaned forward, listening. Liam drew in a breath. "Her name is Emily Carter." Every camera clicked at once. Emily froze. "She's the editor behind this collaboration, the reason it even exists," Liam said, his voice deepening with something close to pride. "And recently, her name has been dragged through headlines that couldn't be further from the truth." Murmurs grew louder. Flashes went off like lightning. Karen's hand found Emily's arm, steadying her. Liam continued, undeterred. "They said she rose because of me, because of favoritism, because of anything but her own talent." His tone sharpened, quiet but firm. "But here's the truth. Emily doesn't need me to shine. She never did." The room went still. He let the pause breathe, let the words settle. Then, softer, he said, "If anything, I'm the one who needed her." Gasps, murmurs. The low hum of disbelief and emotion swept across the hall. Liam looked down for a moment, then back up, his voice trembling slightly now, not from weakness, but from honesty. "I needed the way she fights for what she believes in, the way she makes people remember that, behind every algorithm, every number, there's still a heartbeat. I needed her, because she reminded me that success without soul isn't success at all." A single clap broke the silence, hesitant, from the back of the room, then another and another. Within seconds, the hall erupted in applause, not polite, not forced, real. Emily stood frozen behind the curtain, her throat tight, vision blurring. He wasn't done. "I'll say this once," he said, his voice rising slightly, not loud, but sure. "The future of our company, of this industry, belongs to people like Emily Carter. People who still believe in the power of stories, in the touch of a page, in the quiet courage it takes to stand for something real. The applause swelled again. He stepped back from the microphone, glanced toward the curtain, and for just a moment, just long enough for her to see it, he smiled. Small, private, the kind of smile that said, "This is for you." Emily turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth. The tears came quietly, not from sadness, not entirely from relief, but from the strange, overwhelming mix of both. Karen squeezed her shoulder gently. "He did that for you." Emily nodded, unable to speak. When the applause finally faded, the host returned to the stage, filling the air with closing remarks. Liam stepped off the podium, handed the mic to the assistant, and walked toward the wings. For a second, they just stood there, a curtain, a few feet of air, and 1,000 unspoken things between them. He spoke first. "I meant every word. I know," she said softly. "You didn't have to come today," he said. "Yes, I did." He smiled again, faintly. "You always do the harder thing, don't you? It's the only thing that makes it worth it." They stood like that for a moment, quiet, steady, the noise of the crowd still echoing beyond the curtain. Then, without thinking, Emily reached up and brushed her thumb against his tie. Straightening it, the gesture was simple, familiar. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her, really looked, and whispered, "No. Thank you." The noise from the auditorium swelled again, the murmur of press questions, the clatter of footsteps. But in that small corner of backstage, time seemed to pause. Emily exhaled, the weight of the last week slowly, finally lifting, the shame, the whispers, the doubt, all of it dissolving under the quiet truth of what had just happened. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't misunderstood. She was seen fully, fiercely, undeniably. When she finally walked out into the hall after him, the world didn't look quite the same. Outside, the sunlight had broken through the clouds, spilling across the marble floor like gold. People turned when she passed, not with judgment this time, but with something else. Respect. And as Liam turned back once, their eyes met again. No words, just the soft curve of a smile shared between two people who had fought too hard to hide what was real. Behind them, the banner fluttered in the faint breeze from the open doors. The future of reading. And for the first time, Emily believed it. The future wasn't cold or mechanical. It had a heartbeat, and her name was written quietly inside it. The morning light spilled through the wide windows of their apartment, warm and golden, painting the wooden floor in long ribbons of honey. The city outside hummed softly, not loud, not hurried, just alive. A year had passed since the storm, but in this quiet, it felt like time itself had slowed down to breathe with them. Emily stood barefoot in the kitchen, hair tied loosely, a streak of flour on her cheek. The oven hummed, carrying the scent of strawberries and butter through the air. She leaned slightly against the counter, humming a tune that had no name, tapping the spoon against the bowl in a rhythm that belonged only to mornings like this. Across the room, Liam sat near the window, a book in his hands, glasses slipping a little down his nose, something that always made her smile. He wasn't reading, not really. His eyes moved over the words, but his mind was somewhere between the scent of her baking and the sound of her voice as she spoke mostly to herself about the book she'd just finished editing. "And I told her," Emily said, turning briefly toward him, her tone animated, "that if she keeps forcing the plot, it'll lose its heart. You can't rush emotion, you know?" He smiled, not looking up. "You're talking about the author again, or about yourself. Maybe both," she teased. "And don't pretend you're reading. I can feel you staring." He chuckled softly. "You make it difficult not to." She rolled her eyes, but couldn't stop the grin tugging at her lips. The oven beeped gently, a small, perfect sound that seemed to announce something more than just a batch of tarts being done. She slipped on the mitts, pulled the tray out, and the scent deepened, rich and sweet, wrapping around them like a promise. Liam watched her move, the ease, the quiet joy, the way her shoulders no longer carried the weight they once did. He remembered the woman who had once stood trembling behind a door, too hurt to open it, And now, here she was, open, unguarded, her laughter spilling into the room like sunlight. She set the tray down, proud and playful. I think I've finally perfected it. He rose, closing his book, stretching a little before crossing the space between them. You said that last week. Last week they were too sweet. This time he leaned down, interrupting her words with a kiss. Not hurried, not dramatic, just slow and certain, the kind that didn't need explanation. When he pulled back, his voice was low, smiling. This time, they're perfect. She blinked up at him, pretending to scowl. You didn't even taste them. I didn't have to. Her laughter filled the room again, soft, familiar, and real. For a while, neither spoke. The city moved quietly beyond the windows, the faint honk of a cab, the murmur of wind against the glass, the low buzz of life carrying on. Emily broke the silence first, her voice lighter than it had been in years. You know, I used to think peace looked like success. Awards, recognition, all the things people chase. And now he asked, brushing a crumb of flour from her cheek. She smiled. Now I think it just looks like this. A morning where nothing hurts, where I can breathe and not be afraid of what comes next. Liam's expression softened. I like this version of you. She tilted her head, mock curiosity in her eyes. And what version is that? The one who doesn't need to fight the world to prove she belongs in it? Her gaze held his for a long second before she looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. You helped with that. He shook his head gently. You did that yourself. There was a pause, a quiet one, full of small understanding. Outside, a gull cried somewhere above the bay. Inside, the scent of baked fruit lingered, warm and soft. Emily reached for a tart, broke it in half, and handed him a piece. Okay, taste it now. Tell me if it's perfect. He took a bite, eyes closing for a moment. Perfect. See, she said, triumphant. Told you. But he was still looking at her when he said, I wasn't talking about the tart. Her breath caught not because of the words themselves, but because of the way he said them, quietly, as if he didn't want to break the spell of the morning. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. The clock on the wall ticked softly, the sunlight shifting inch by inch across the floor. Then she laughed again, that low, genuine sound that made him fall all over once more and turn back to the counter. You always know how to make me stop talking. He smiled, stepping closer, his voice barely a murmur now. That's because I know what works. And before she could answer, he kissed her again, gentle, sure, the kind of kiss that didn't demand silence but invited it. When he pulled away, his forehead rested against hers. I'm addicted to you. Emily, he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. And I don't ever want to get better. She didn't answer right away. She just smiled, her hands resting against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm there. That was all the answer he needed. The world outside carried on a siren in the distance, a child laughing somewhere down the street. But inside that apartment, time moved slower. The light through the windows shifted from gold to a deeper amber, wrapping around them like an embrace. Emily turned off the oven, wiped her hands on a towel, and leaned her head against Liam's shoulder. He opened his book again, and she began talking about something new. A manuscript, a memory, a dream. And though she kept speaking, he barely heard the words. He was listening to something else, the quiet sound of her joy, the peace in her breathing, the soft pulse of a life finally at ease. After everything they had been through, the noise, the doubts, the endless proving, it came down to this. A room full of sunlight, the smell of strawberries, the simple act of being together. When the wind shifted, it carried a page from his book fluttering to the floor. Emily bent to pick it up. Her fingers brushed the paper, her reflection caught faintly in its white. She smiled not at the page, not even at him, but at the quiet truth between them. Some loves don't need grand gestures. They just need time. And as the day stretched out before them, slow and golden, Emily's laughter filled the apartment once more, soft, bright, and endless, like a story that had finally found its peace. Sometimes life teaches us through quiet moments rather than grand events. Emily and Liam's story isn't just about love, it's about dignity, patience, and the courage to stay true to yourself when the world misjudges you. We all face times when our worth is questioned or our intentions are misunderstood. In those moments, silence and perseverance often speak louder than defense. This story reminds us that forgiveness is not weakness, and gentleness is not surrender. Healing begins when we stop proving ourselves to others and start living in the truth of who we are. Success, after all, isn't measured by recognition or noise. It's found in peace, integrity, and the quiet strength to love without pride. For those who have lived long enough to know the weight of time, this tale is a soft reminder, even after pain, there can still be tenderness, after disappointment, hope, and after silence. A voice that speaks through kindness, because love in all its forms is never about possession. It's about presence. Thank you, dear listener, for staying with us until the very end of this story. If Emily and Liam's journey touched your heart, even just a little, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to our channel, Shining Stories, for more gentle tales about love, dignity, and second chances. Your support helps these stories keep shining one heart at a time.